Hello and welcome to What If Deku Had the Butterfly Miraculous. I wrote everything myself, but the idea came from @WabbyJane on TikTok. I hope you enjoy. This is part 1. If you want to see more, like and comment some ideas for future parts. Chapter 1, Butterfly of Fate. For a moment, everything was quiet. Despite the sludge filling his lungs. Despite the villain forcing itself into his body. Despite the burning panic clawing at his chest. Izuku Midoriya felt peace. A terrible kind of peace. No one would care when he was gone. He was a useless Deku after all. The world around him became dark and distant, the sounds of the underpass fading into muffled static as his consciousness slipped further away. The sludge villain's laughter echoed faintly in his ears, distorted and warped like it was underwater. Then, a booming voice shattered the silence. Carolina Smaaash. The world exploded. Wind roared through the underpass hard enough to shake the concrete beneath him. The pressure around Izuku vanished instantly as the sludge was ripped away from his body. He hit the pavement hard. Air rushed painfully back into his lungs. Then everything went black. When Izuku finally opened his eyes again, the first thing he saw was a massive smiling face leaning over him. "Are you okay, young man?" Izuku froze. His brain stopped functioning immediately. Towering over him in all his overwhelming, impossible glory was the #1 hero himself. All Might. Even crouched down inside a grimy underpass, he felt larger than life. His bright smile practically lit up the tunnel, and his mere presence made the air feel different somehow. Izuku's face turned red instantly. I think so." His voice cracked embarrassingly halfway through the sentence. All Might laughed warmly, resting a hand on his shoulder. "That's good. You gave us quite the scare there." "Us?" Izuku barely processed the word. His mind was already spiraling somewhere else entirely. Notebook. Where was his notebook? He scrambled upright so quickly he nearly tripped over himself. I need my notebook." He frantically searched the wet concrete around him before spotting the familiar green cover a few feet away. He lunged toward it, carefully scooping it into his hands like it was treasure. "Please don't be ruined, please don't be ruined." Izuku opened the notebook. Then immediately froze. Across 2 entire pages was a massive signature written in bold black ink. All Might. He already signed it? Izuku squealed. Actually squealed. His hands shook as he stared at the autograph in complete disbelief. This was it. His greatest possession. Nothing in his life would ever top this moment. Then something caught his eye. A faint purple glint near the edge of the underpass wall. Izuku blinked. Huh. He carefully approached the object, crouching down to pick it up. The second his fingers touched it, purple energy sparked violently across his hand. Izuku yelped, nearly dropping the object as a strange warmth spread through his fingers. Then a soft voice whispered inside his mind. "Please. Don't let them take me again." Izuku's breath caught. He looked around wildly. No one was there. The underpass was empty. "Okay," he whispered shakily. "I'm definitely hallucinating." He turned around quickly. "All Might, I actually had a question about." Empty. All Might was gone. So was the sludge villain. Only scattered debris remained. Izuku stared blankly for a moment before sighing softly. Right. Super speed. He looked back down at the object in his hands. It was a brooch. A polished purple gem rested at its center, framed by 4 silver pieces shaped almost like butterfly wings. It looked expensive. Old, maybe. Strange. Izuku carefully slipped it into his pocket before checking his watch. His face immediately drained of color. Oh crap. Mom was absolutely going to kill him. Without another thought, Izuku grabbed his backpack and bolted toward home. Completely unaware that his life had just split away from the path it was once meant to follow. Chapter 2, Trust of Power. Izuku woke up to the smell of sludge. For one horrifying second, he thought he was still trapped inside the villain. Then reality slowly settled back into place. His room. His bed. The faded All Might posters covering the walls. Morning light spilling weakly through the curtains. Izuku exhaled shakily, pressing a hand against his face. Right, he mumbled into his pillow. Not dead. His Aldera uniform was still on from yesterday, though thankfully dry now. Unfortunately, the awful smell had survived the night. He grimaced, tugging slightly at the fabric. Ugh. Memories of the underpass came flooding back all at once. The sludge villain. All Might. The autograph. The weird glowing brooch. Izuku sat upright immediately. The brooch. He shoved a hand into his pocket, relief washing over him when his fingers brushed cold metal. Carefully, he pulled the object free and held it up toward the morning light. The purple gem shimmered faintly. It really was beautiful. Up close, the silver framing looked even more detailed than he remembered. The metal curved delicately around the gem-like butterfly wings frozen mid-flight. Izuku turned it over in his hand slowly. No brand markings. No visible latch mechanism. Nothing that explained the voice he heard yesterday. He frowned slightly. Maybe I hit my head harder than I thought. Still. Part of him couldn't stop staring at it. Curiosity eventually won, as it always did. Izuku climbed out of bed and walked over to the mirror in the corner of his room. After a moment of hesitation, he carefully pinned the brooch to the collar of his uniform. The second it clicked into place. Purple light flooded the room. Izuku yelped, stumbling backwards so fast he nearly tripped over his chair. Butterflies burst outward from the brooch in a swirling wave of glowing violet energy, filling the air around him. They spiraled through the room like living light before gathering together near his desk. The glow slowly condensed. Smaller. Smaller. Until finally, a tiny creature hovered in the air where the butterflies had gathered. Izuku stared. The creature was small, barely bigger than his hand, with dark purple skin and large butterfly-like wings resting against its back. A curled antenna-like swirl sat atop its head, and its large eyes darted around the room nervously. The tiny being noticed Izuku staring and immediately ducked behind a stack of notebooks on the desk. Izuku's brain stopped functioning. What? The creature slowly peeked its head out from behind the books. Hello, it said softly. Izuku blinked once. Twice. Then pointed at it with a trembling finger. You can talk. The creature flinched slightly at his volume. Sorry. No, wait, I should be apologizing. Izuku blurted immediately. What are you? The tiny creature hesitated before floating carefully out from behind the notebooks. It hovered uncertainly in front of him, wringing its small hands together. My name is Noru, it said quietly. Izuku stared blankly. Okay. Noru waited. Izuku continued staring. I'm dreaming. You are not concussed. No. Hallucinating. Noru paused. Probably also no. Izuku slowly sat down on the edge of his bed before his legs gave out completely. The tiny creature hovered awkwardly nearby. After several seconds of complete silence, Izuku nervously raised a hand. Hi, he said weakly. I'm Izuku. Noru smiled slightly. I know. That somehow made things even weirder. Izuku looked between Noru and the brooch still attached to his collar. Then back again. So, he said carefully, can you explain literally any of this? Noru nodded once. The object you found is called a miraculous, he explained softly. Specifically, the butterfly miraculous. Izuku immediately grabbed the nearest notebook. Noru blinked. Wait, you're taking notes? Obviously I'm taking notes. Izuku exclaimed, flipping to a blank page. A tiny glowing butterfly creature just appeared in my room. This is scientifically impossible. You say that while living in a world with giant robots and people who explode. That's different. Noru looked unconvinced but continued anyway. Miraculous are magical jewels connected to beings called kwamis. I am a kwami. Izuku scribbled furiously across the page. Kwami. Magical energy entity. Linked to artifact. The butterfly miraculous grants the power of transformation. Izuku's pencil stopped mid-sentence. Transformation, M. Noru nodded. When used properly, it allows its holder to help others become something greater than they are normally. Izuku looked down slowly at the brooch. Then back at Noru. You're serious? Yes. Silence filled the room again. Izuku's thoughts raced so fast he could barely keep up with them. Magic existed. Actual magic. Not quirks. Not mutations. Not support technology. Magic. And somehow, through pure accident, he had stumbled into it. Noru's expression softened slightly as he watched him process everything. Thank you, the kwami said quietly. Izuku looked up. For what? For saving me. Izuku froze. Saving you. Noru nodded slowly. My previous holder lost the miraculous, he explained. If someone else had found it, things could have become very dangerous. Izuku frowned. But I didn't really save you, he admitted. I just picked it up. You protected it, Noru corrected gently. That matters. Izuku looked down at the notebook in his lap. Then quietly asked. What exactly does that make me now? Noru floated slightly closer. For the first time since appearing, the small kwami smiled fully. The new holder of the butterfly miraculous. Chapter 3, The Training Begins. Izuku Midoriya felt like his brain was melting. He had spent the last 3 hours talking to Noru, and somehow every answer only created 5 more questions. His notebooks were spread across the desk in complete chaos, pages filled with frantic writing, diagrams, arrows, and enough underlined text to qualify as a hazard. Magic existed. Actual magic. Not quirks. Not support gear. Not some hidden government experiment. Magic. And somehow, through a completely ridiculous chain of events involving a sludge villain and All Might punching a sewer tunnel apart, he had ended up with it. Izuku slowly dropped his forehead onto the desk. This is insane, he mumbled into the wood. Noru hovered quietly nearby. It is a little overwhelming at first, the kwami admitted softly. A little. Izuku shot upright so quickly his chair squeaked against the floor. Noru, you just explained that there are multiple miraculous, magical creatures called kwamis, transformation states, and powers that evolve over time. He gestured wildly toward the notebook. And I have to design a suit. Noru blinked once. Yes. Izuku stared at him. Then immediately resumed panicking. How am I supposed to do that? I've never designed anything before. What if it looks stupid? He grabbed at his hair dramatically. And how am I supposed to explain any of this to people? His voice lowered slightly. Especially Kiken. The room grew quieter after that. Izuku sank back into his chair, rubbing his eyes tiredly. If I suddenly show up with some flashy superpower, he muttered, he's going to know something's weird. Noru listened carefully. Izuku sighed heavily before glancing back down at the notes scattered across the desk. Noru had explained as much as he could about the butterfly miraculous already. Transformation. Manifested constructs. Butterflies made from magical energy. Protective capabilities. Potential future abilities as Izuku grew stronger and more connected to the miraculous. That last part still terrified him a little. It all sounded incredible. But also impossibly huge. Izuku looked down at his own hands. I want to become a hero, he admitted quietly. I really do. Then he laughed weakly. But this feels like someone skipped 10 steps and dropped me into the middle of the story. Noru's expression softened. The Kwami understood confusion. Understood fear. But more than anything, Noru understood powerless people. And Izuku Midoriya reminded him painfully of someone he once knew. Someone kind. Someone determined. Someone who kept trying to help people even when the world made that difficult. Noru floated silently down toward the desk. His previous holder had not been kind. The memory alone made his wings twitch slightly. Power used cruelly was exhausting. Power used selfishly was frightening. But Izuku's first instinct had been questions. Not greed. Not control. Questions. And despite how overwhelmed he clearly was, he still hadn't once spoken about becoming stronger than everyone else. Only about becoming a hero. Noru looked at the boy carefully. Izuku was smart. Very smart. But physically, Noru was fairly certain a strong gust of wind could knock him unconscious. That was going to become a problem. Quietly, Noru floated over toward one of the open notebooks on the desk. He grabbed a nearby pen with both tiny hands, struggling slightly with the size of it before finally managing to steady it against the paper. Izuku blinked. Noru. The Kwami ignored him for the moment, slowly scribbling across the page in surprisingly neat handwriting. Izuku leaned closer curiously. At the top of the page, Noru wrote. Things Izuku needs to work on. Below it. Physical strength. Endurance. Reaction time. Balance. Sleep schedule. Self-confidence. Actual combat ability. Eating vegetables voluntarily. Izuku stared. Hey. Noru continued writing. Better posture. Less muttering during emotional distress. Stronger emotional control. More water. Noru. The Kwami finally looked up innocently. Yes. Izuku pointed accusingly at the notebook. I drink water. Noru slowly looked him up and down. Not enough. Izuku opened his mouth. then closed it again. Okay, maybe not enough, he admitted reluctantly. Noru nodded once before tapping the notebook with the pen. The butterfly miraculous is powerful, he explained gently. But power alone is dangerous without a capable holder. Izuku looked down at the list again. The joking mood faded slightly. You really think I can do this? Noru answered immediately. Yes. No hesitation. No uncertainty. Just simple honesty. That somehow hit harder than any dramatic speech could have. Izuku looked away quickly, face warming slightly. Oh. Noru floated upward again, setting the pen down carefully. You are kind, the Kwami continued softly. And you wish to protect people. Those things matter. Izuku swallowed. No one had ever really said something like that to him before. At least not seriously. Noru pointed toward the notebook again. But if you wish to wield the butterfly miraculous properly. A tiny smile crossed the Kwami's face. Training must begin. A little note before I continue on to chapter 4. I know miraculous holders don't design their suits. I just feel as though it would be a nice detail and could help bring plot holes together like Catwalker. We know a miraculous holder can have multiple suits. I think this detail just helps understand why. Chapter 4, Not a Copy of the Light. Izuku was in pain. Noru's training was never cruel for the sake of it. It was precise. Unforgiving in its expectations, but never wasteful. Every mistake had to be understood, not just corrected. Every success had to be repeatable. And Izuku was still learning that understanding himself was harder than learning the power. When Noru finally called a stop, Izuku dropped to a seated position on the floor, breathing hard. You are improving, Noru said, hovering in front of him. But you are still imitating. Izuku frowned. Imitating. Yes. Noru's voice stayed calm, but firm. All of your answers lead back to All Might. Izuku hesitated. Is that bad? It is incomplete. That word sat heavier than Izuku expected. He looked down at his hands. But he's the ideal. The symbol of peace. That's what a hero is supposed to be, right? Noru drifted closer. That is what he is. Not necessarily what you are. Izuku opened his mouth, then closed it again. That's what I'm trying to become, he said quietly. No, Noru corrected immediately. You are trying to become a copy of something already finished. That made Izuku go still. The Kwami's tone softened slightly, but didn't lose its edge. Tell me, Izuku Midoriya. When you imagine yourself as a hero, do you see yourself? Or do you see All Might wearing your face? Izuku didn't answer right away. Because the truth was uncomfortable. I just want to help people like he does, he said finally. And yet you keep building your identity on someone else's foundation, Noru replied. That will collapse the moment you are forced to stand alone. Silence followed. Not empty silence. Pressure silence. Izuku exhaled slowly. Then what am I supposed to be? No, Noru said. That is the wrong question again. Izuku looked up. You are not being asked to choose an ideal, Noru continued. You are being asked to define yourself. What do you bring into the world that no one else does? Izuku's brows tightened. I don't know. You are not supposed to know yet, Noru said. But you are supposed to stop reaching for answers that belong to someone else. Later that day, Izuku sat beside his mother on the couch. The apartment was quiet in the soft, ordinary way it always was. His mom watched an old recorded stage play pre-Quark era, simple production, no spectacle beyond human effort and timing. Izuku's sketchbook sat open in his lap. It was still full of failures. Heavy armor. Standard hero silhouettes. Variations of All Might but smaller. Every page felt like a different way of getting the same answer wrong. He flipped another page. Noru's words echoed in the back of his mind. Not imitating. On the TV, the scene shifted. A magician stepped onto the stage. Izuku barely registered it at first. Just another performer in an old play. No quirks. No real power. Just presentation. The magician raised his hands. A rabbit appeared from an empty hat. Then another. Then something vanished entirely in a puff of smoke, drawing laughter and surprised applause from the audience. Izuku's pencil slowed. Noru's voice followed him even here, sharp in memory rather than sound. What do you bring into the world that no one else does? Izuku watched the audience reaction instead of the trick itself. They weren't analyzing it. They weren't breaking it down. They were just reacting surprised, entertained, briefly pulled out of whatever weight they carried before sitting down. Not strength. Not authority. Attention control. Emotion direction. A shift in perception. Izuku's grip on his pencil tightened slightly. That wasn't All Might. All Might overwhelmed fear. This redirected it. Not by force. By focus. His eyes dropped to his sketchbook. Slowly, the page stopped feeling like a place to copy ideas. And started feeling like a place to design something new. Noru. Izuku said quietly, almost unsure if he was allowed to say it yet. What if a hero didn't just make people feel safe after the danger, but help them not feel swallowed by it while it's happening? The Kwami appeared beside him. That is closer, Noru said. Not approving. Not rejecting. Just assessing. But you are still speaking in generalities. That idea is not yet you. Izuku swallowed. Then I don't know how to make it more me. No, Noru replied. You do not yet have the courage to define it without leaning on someone else's shadow. That stung more than Izuku expected. He looked back down at the page. The pencil moved again, slower this time, more deliberate. Not armor. Not imitation. Something lighter started forming. Less about dominance, more about movement. Less about presence that crushed fear. And more about presence that redirected it. And in the corner of the page, without him fully deciding to include it yet, a butterfly shape began to appear not as decoration, but as function. Izuku paused. Then kept drawing. Not as All Might. Not as a copy. Something else was starting to take shape, even if he couldn't name it yet. Chapter 5, Old Names, New Weight. Izuku tried to act normal. That was the hardest part. Not the training. Not Noru's expectations. Not even the strange new ideas forming in his head about what kind of hero he might become. It was walking back into Aldera like nothing had changed. The streets looked the same. The air smelled the same. People passed by without a second glance, caught in their own routines, their own small worlds. Izuku kept his posture steady. Noru stayed hidden. You are tense, Noru observed softly, hovering just out of sight inside the folds of Izuku's bag. I'm fine, Izuku whispered under his breath. You are lying, Noru replied immediately. Izuku didn't answer that. He wasn't used to carrying something like this. A secret that wasn't just information but presence. Awareness. Responsibility. Every step felt like he might accidentally reveal something just by existing wrong. And then there was Bakugo. Izuku spotted him before Bakugo spotted him. Same walk, same posture. Same sharp confidence, like the world was already behind him and just hadn't realized it yet. Izuku's instinct tightened immediately. Old habit. Old fear. Old everything. But something was different now. He didn't look away as quickly. Noru noticed that too. That is him, Noru said quietly. Yeah, Izuku murmured. This is the one you call a friend. Izuku hesitated for half a step. We grew up together. That is not the same thing, Noru said. Izuku frowned slightly. He's not bad. He's just loud, Noru suggested. I was going to say intense. Noru hummed softly, unconvinced. They watched Bakugo from a distance as he moved through the street, brushing past people who instinctively gave him space without him asking for it. There was no hesitation in his movement. No awareness of whether others were comfortable with it. Just direction. Force of will. You are still attached to him, Noru observed. Izuku shifted his grip on his bag strap. He's important to me. In what way? Izuku opened his mouth, then closed it again. That question shouldn't have been difficult. But it was. He pushed me, Izuku said finally. Even when it hurt. He made me want to get better. Noru's tone sharpened slightly. That is not friendship. Izuku frowned. It can be. Can it? Noru asked. Izuku didn't answer immediately. Bakugo disappeared around a corner ahead of them, still completely unaware of their presence. Noru's voice softened, but didn't lose its edge. He does not look at you as an equal. Izuku's jaw tightened slightly. I know. And yet you still define him as someone important to you. Izuku stopped walking for a moment. The crowd moved around him. He didn't notice at first. I don't want to hate him, Izuku said quietly. That is not the question I asked, Noru replied. Izuku exhaled. I don't know, he admitted. That honesty hung there longer than anything else. They started walking again. At school, Izuku was better at pretending than he expected. He smiled when necessary. Answered when spoken to. Kept his eyes down just enough to avoid attention but not enough to seem suspicious. He was still Izuku Midoriya. Just not the same one internally. Noru stayed quiet during class, observing more than speaking. At one point, Bakugo passed by the hallway outside. The air changed instantly. Even without words, Bakugo carried pressure with him. People moved aside automatically. Conversations dipped slightly. Attention bent around him without effort. Noru watched carefully. He does not need to try to be seen, Noru said. Izuku kept his gaze forward. That's just how he is. No, Noru corrected. That is how he has been allowed to become. Izuku didn't respond. But something about that line stayed with him. After school, Bakugo spoke to him briefly, sharply, like always. Nothing changed there. Same tone. Same dismissiveness. Same assumption that Izuku would still be there no matter what was said. Izuku answered like he always had. Careful. Small. Familiar. But inside, Something shifted again, not rejection, not acceptance. Just awareness. Noru stayed silent until they were alone again. You hesitate around him, Noru said. I always have. That is not what I mean, Noru replied. You hesitate still. Izuku looked down slightly. He's still kickin'. Noru tilted in the air. And what does that name mean to you now? Izuku didn't answer immediately. Because the truth wasn't simple anymore. He's someone I don't want to lose, Izuku said finally. Noru hummed. Even if he does not treat you as someone worth keeping. That question didn't get an answer either. Not yet. By the time Izuku got home, his thoughts were heavier than when he left. He set his bag down carefully. Noru emerged, floating into view. You are conflicted, the Kwami said. Izuku nodded once. Yeah. That is expected, Noru continued. You are beginning to separate your identity from imitation. That process creates friction with your past connections. Izuku sat down slowly. So what do I do about him? Noru paused. For now, he said, observe. Do not excuse. Do not condemn. Understand what he truly is, not what you wish him to be. Izuku leaned back slightly. That sounds harder than training, he muttered. It is, Noru replied simply. Izuku let out a small breath. Outside, the world kept moving like nothing had changed. But inside him, things definitely had. And for the first time, he wasn't entirely sure they could go back. Chapter 6, The Shape of the Act. There was 1 week left until the UA entrance exam. Izuku had stopped sleeping normally somewhere around 3 days ago. His room floor had completely disappeared beneath scattered papers, notebooks, and discarded sketches. Costume concepts covered nearly every visible surface, some crumpled, some half-finished, some aggressively crossed out like he was offended by their existence. Noru floated quietly above the chaos. You are overthinking again, the Kwami observed. Izuku didn't look up from the page. I'm designing a hero identity from scratch in 7 days. You have been designing one for much longer than 7 days. Yeah, badly. Another sketch joined the pile. Too armored. Another. Too close to All Might. Another. Too plain. Izuku groaned and dropped backward onto the floor. Why is this so hard? Because you are attempting to visualize a person you have only recently allowed yourself to become, Noru replied. That sounded annoyingly wise. Izuku sat back up with a sigh and looked over the newest page. The ideas were getting closer, at least. The designs were slimmer now. Less focused on intimidation and more focused on movement. He'd abandoned bulky armor almost entirely after realizing it didn't fit the image in his head anymore. This hero wasn't supposed to feel immovable. He was supposed to feel impossible to pin down. His pencil tapped against the paper thoughtfully. Then his eyes drifted toward one of the older sketches still sitting nearby. A stage performer silhouette. Long coat. Elegant posture. Confidence that looked almost artificial. Izuku slowly grabbed it again. Noru noticed immediately. That one interests you. I think I understand why now, Izuku admitted quietly. He started sketching over the old design instead of starting fresh. The coat changed first. Not a cape. Not exactly. A layered cloak-like overcoat draped around the shoulders, split along the back for movement. The edges curved outward slightly like butterfly wings when viewed from behind, subtle enough that it didn't look costume-like at first glance. The inside lining gained soft circular patterns inspired by butterfly wings, not bright symbols, but design elements hidden naturally into the fabric. Then came the suit beneath it. A fitted vest. Clean lines. Dress clothes adapted for mobility rather than combat armor. Refined. Performative. The sleeves tightened near the wrists into white gloves, smooth and elegant instead of tactical. His pencil moved faster. A cane appeared next. Izuku paused at that. Okay, maybe that's too much. No, Noru said calmly. You only hesitate because it is unusual. Izuku looked at the drawing again. The cane actually fit disturbingly well. Not as a weapon. As part of the image. A distraction piece. Something theatrical. Something people would notice first while missing everything else. Misdirection. That made his eyes widen slightly. Then came the final piece. The hat. Izuku hesitated longer this time. A top hat feels ridiculous for a hero, he muttered. And yet you continue drawing it, Noru replied. That was becoming a pattern. Slowly, Izuku refined it instead of erasing it. Not oversized. Sleek. Sharp enough to feel intentional instead of comedic. Combined with the coat and formal wear, it transformed the design immediately. Suddenly it wasn't just fancy. It looked deliberate. Like someone stepping onto a stage. Or into a scene. Izuku stared at the page. Green layered fabric draped around the shoulders almost like folded wings. Elegant formal wear beneath it. White gloves. Cane. Butterfly-inspired detailing worked subtly into the design. And at the center of it all. A smile. Not drawn directly. But implied by the posture alone. Confident. Playful. Controlled. It didn't look like All Might. That thought hit him harder this time. There was no overwhelming strength in the design. No giant silhouette meant to dominate a battlefield. Instead, it looked like someone who controlled the flow of attention itself. Someone who entered dangerous situations and somehow made them feel less suffocating just by being there. A performer. A magician. A hero. Izuku swallowed slightly. This feels more real. Noru floated beside him, observing the sketch carefully. Yes, the Kwami said softly. Because this one finally resembles you. Izuku looked down again. For once, he didn't immediately search for flaws. His eyes drifted toward the calendar hanging beside his desk. 7 days until UA. 7 days until he stood beside students with powerful quirks, combat training, confidence. And somehow, for the first time since receiving the miraculous, he didn't feel like he was trying to become somebody else before he got there. The pencil touched the page one more time. At the top of the design sheet, he finally wrote, Hero Concept Wisp. Then paused. Maybe. Noru hummed thoughtfully. A fitting beginning. Chapter 6, Wings at UA. The morning of the UA entrance exam felt unreal. Izuku stood outside the gate staring upward, momentarily frozen as crowds of applicants moved around him. The building was massive, far larger than anything he had imagined from pictures or videos. It looked less like a school and more like the future itself. His stomach twisted. Around him, students talked confidently about quirks, combat training, recommendations, strategies for the practical exam. Some looked excited. Others looked completely certain they belonged here. Izuku adjusted the strap of his bag nervously. Inside it, Noru's quiet voice reached him. "You are shaking." "I know," Izuku whispered back. "You have prepared for this. That doesn't stop it from being terrifying." Noru hummed softly. "Fear and readiness are not opposites." Izuku took a slow breath. That helped more than he expected. Over the past week, training had become smoother. More controlled. He no longer struggled to transform under pressure, and the miraculous itself responded to him faster now, as though the hesitation between thought and action was slowly disappearing. He still had limits, of course. He could only use the butterfly miraculous power while transformed, and even then he could only maintain one empowered target at a time. But compared to where he started, it felt like an entirely different world. The written exam passed easier than expected. Izuku nearly laughed from relief halfway through it. Numbers. Hero law. Strategy questions. Rescue theory. Basic quirk application scenarios. This was familiar territory, the kind of thing he'd spent years obsessively studying on his own. For once, he didn't feel behind. Then came the practical. And suddenly the nerves returned all over again. Applicants gathered near the massive gates leading into the mock city. Excitement buzzed through the crowd, mixed with tension sharp enough to feel physical. Present Mick's voice exploded across the arena speakers with enough volume to make several students jump. Izuku included. He listened carefully to the explanation, eyes drifting toward the giant mechanical doors waiting ahead of them. Combat robots. Different point values. Avoid the zero-pointer. Standard UA chaos. The second the gates opened, the crowd surged forward. Izuku nearly got swept with them before forcing himself to stop. Think. What kind of hero are you trying to be? Not All Might. Not a copy. His hand brushed the miraculous hidden beneath his sleeve. A decision settled into place. Noru, he whispered. The familiar energy wrapped around him instantly. Dark wings rise. The transformation flowed smoothly now. No panic. No stumbling. Green-black energy spiraled around him as his appearance shifted into the refined butterfly-themed suit he'd spent nights designing. The layered coat settled around his shoulders like folded wings, white gloves tightening around his hands as the top hat formed last. And then he moved. Not toward the biggest robots. Toward the people. The city erupted into chaos almost immediately. Explosions. Crashing metal. Students shouting attacks across intersections. Izuku darted through it all with surprising grace, butterflies scattering around him as he moved between collapsing areas and injured applicants. Someone trapped beneath debris? Butterflies lifted the rubble just enough for escape. A student cornered by a robot they clearly couldn't handle? A dark butterfly landed softly against their shoulder. Strength surged through them. Confidence. Focus. The student turned the fight around instantly. Izuku smiled beneath the mask before moving again. He wasn't earning points the normal way. But people were succeeding around him. The exam slowly stopped feeling like a battlefield and started feeling like a stage he understood. Movement. Timing. Attention. Misdirection. Everywhere he went, green butterflies followed. At one point he noticed a few instructors watching the monitors with visible confusion. A robot collapsed 3 streets away while the student responsible looked equally shocked by their own success. Another applicant was evacuated from danger by a swarm of butterflies carrying chunks of debris away piece by piece. Izuku barely noticed the attention. For the first time since arriving, he was too focused to be afraid. Then the ground shook. The zero-pointer appeared. Massive. Overwhelming. The atmosphere changed instantly as students began fleeing in panic. Izuku froze for only half a second before hearing it. A cry for help. His head snapped toward the sound. Okako Yuriko was pinned beneath a massive slab of rubble, panic written clearly across her face as the giant robot approached. Izuku moved immediately. No hesitation. Butterflies burst outward around him as he rushed forward, sliding beside the trapped girl. "Are you okay?" he asked quickly. I am fine, but..." The ground trembled again. No time. Izuku planted both hands against the broken slab instinctively. It didn't move. Too heavy. His heart pounded. Then Noru's voice cut through the panic. "You are not lifting it alone." Izuku's eyes widened slightly. "Right." Butterflies exploded outward around him in massive numbers, swirling through the air in glowing green currents before converging against the rubble itself. The slab shifted. Slowly. Then higher. Okako stared in shock as dozens then hundreds of butterflies helped carry the weight upward with him. Izuku gritted his teeth, maintaining focus as the rubble finally lifted enough for her to crawl free. "Run," he shouted. She stumbled backward before looking at him again, wide-eyed beneath the chaos surrounding them. The zero-pointer loomed overhead. Huge. Impossible. And for the first time, Izuku didn't feel small looking at it. Butterflies spiraled around him in glowing waves as his coat flared behind him like unfolding wings. Confidence settled into place so suddenly it almost startled him. Not fake confidence. Not imitation. His. The fear was still there. But it wasn't controlling him anymore. And standing there beneath the shadow of the giant machine, surrounded by swirling butterflies and broken debris, Izuku Midoriya finally looked like a hero. This was part 1. I hope you enjoyed.